Picture this. It's night. You're outside. The breeze is blowing gently, the crickets are chirping, and the stars are shining bright. You're stargazing. It's easy to get wrapped up in the everyday monotony of life, but every once in a while, we like to look up at the stars and wonder what else there is. Are we truly alone in this empty universe? Well, the analog horror series we'll be discussing today answers that question with a resounding absolutely not. Midwest Angelica began on January 21st, 2022. Its reception was overwhelmingly positive, and that wasn't for no reason. It has some of the most authentic direction of any internet horror series out there. Couple that with an interesting premise based in cosmic horror, and you have yourself something fantastic. For some reason, though, the series does have a pretty limited reach, garnering a disproportionately low amount of traction relative to its quality. Personally, I'm of the opinion that this series has the potential to be up there with the greats such as the Mandela catalog, and its creator, Alex Kister, seems to think so too. So, that all being said, today I hope to tell you all exactly why I believe Midwest Angelica is stupidly underrated horror. The way that this'll work will be similar to my previous videos covering internet horror. I'm gonna go through each of the entries in release order, give some brief thoughts here and there, and at the end I'll have a section dedicated to overall analysis and theories as to what is ultimately happening. And, of course, I do recommend that you watch Midwest Angelica on your own before coming to the video if you want the best possible experience. Alright, enough rambling. Let's get straight into the first video. Call now.
In the year 1999, a corpse descends from the cosmos, right into your backyard.
The video is pretty short, being just under a minute, but it seems to be an advertisement for a sci-fi film sharing a title with the series, Midwest Angelica. The narrator describes the film as an alien thriller with a threat like no other. He then goes on to say that critics are calling it a sublime experience into the realm of the unknown, and a twister of biblical proportions. We get a brief but horrifying visual, and then the last shot of the ad showing the phone number and price of the film, and then it ends.
Shipping and handling. Call now.
It was not over. Interesting. Even though the video is short, already it establishes itself with an incredibly powerful and authentic visual flair, and the original soundtrack does the job of tying it all together. Before I saw this, you could have told me it was a real ad from the 90s, and I wouldn't have thought you were lying. The description also has a story of its own to tell, and it's pretty damn interesting. Midwest Angelica 000. The tape was discovered at the Oklahoma Cherokee site. It is believed that the footage, which depicts an advertisement on KMTV Channel 3, was recorded sometime between October 31st of 1991 and January 1st of 1992. The product depicted in the advertisement, a film titled Midwest Angelica, has yet to be recovered. There's two things I briefly want to talk about before we move on to the next video. Apparently, there are deities in Native American mythology, though generally affiliated with the Cherokee, called the Ani-Huntuqualaski, also known as the Thunderers. These spirits were humanoid in form and commanded lightning and thunder in the sky, which could explain some of the inspiration for visuals in the video. I would be lying if I said I discovered that part on my own, because I can only thank Sinister Heart and the insight I gained from his video essay on the series. The second thing I wanted to point out, which is much more mundane, is that the writer of the video's description believes the tape aired on KMTV Channel 3, the very same that displayed the tornado warning at the end of the video. I'm not sure if the tornado warning has any greater meaning, and it may just be an artifact of the tape having been recorded from live TV. The counties for which the tornado warning was issued, Washington and Douglas County, are on the eastern border of Nebraska. Tornadoes are not uncharacteristic of Nebraska, but they are significantly less common between October and January, which is allegedly when this aired. Now let's move on to our next entry. In a refreshing change of pace, Home is the longest video in the series. Rather than being an ad, it's framed as an informational video created by an organization fittingly called Home. We learn straight away that this group is affiliated with NASA and the footage is protected by the federal government in some way. Our story seems to begin all the way back in June of 1985. After witnessing an anomaly while observing the outer reaches of space, Dr. Lucas Michaels of the Glenn Research Center and his team, not wanting to dismiss the anomaly as a simple instrumentation error, decide to do a safe double check. And what they find is not something that they'd ever have expected. A massive chunk of matter, 63.6 kilometers in diameter, just floating around near Jupiter's orbit casually. They've named this anomaly AZ001. Fast forwarding a few months, by November they've made several more shocking discoveries related to the nature of this anomaly. Between June and September, their bioscans discovered that not only is it not harboring life, it is itself alive. The next time jump is significantly longer, all the way up to March of 1987. By now, they've used computer simulations to calculate the theoretical trajectory of object AZ001, and they've determined that it will be within Earth's orbit in 12 years, 1999, the year from the film ad. With all of these factors considered, it's no wonder why NASA formed the Division of Heavenly Operations and Material Examination, HOME. This division is entirely responsible for all research and safekeeping from the public related to AZ001, and NASA plans on making contact with the anomaly once it arrives. The doctor who's been with us narrating up until now, Lucas Michaels, mysteriously disappears 2 years after being given a lead position within HOME. His whereabouts are unknown. In his place, a new doctor, Ray O'Connor, emerges to narrate the video instead. At this point, we've hit the year 1995. As AZ001 draws near, even from millions of miles away, they can detect brainwaves being emanated from it. Just after this, we get a line that reads, "Home's psychological research became crucial in understanding the nature of AZ001. I think the placement of this text with the context we just saw implies that these brainwaves might have some kind of major psychological effect." And then we fast forward again to January 1999. On January 1st, 1999, almost like clockwork, AZ001 enters high Earth orbit. This area, mostly reserved for navigation and research satellites, is over 22,000 miles above Earth's sea level. It can be seen passing the moon in a shot that radiates the energy of pure cosmic horror. About 2 weeks later, it enters low Earth orbit, which is 18 times closer than it was before, and during this time, close-up photos are taken. 3 days later, a large chunk of AZ001, dubbed AZ001 Alpha, separates from the main body. This visual shows the atmospheric radio propagations, or transfer of radio waves during this separation, and it's clear that something happened at the time. Unlikely to be caused by sporadic E refers to a relatively rare and unpredictable event in which radio propagation occurs off of small clouds of ionized gas in the lower altitudes of the atmosphere. Essentially, the documentation is claiming that this reading is not based on sporadic E, but is certainly related to AZ001. Then it enters the atmosphere. It lands in Nebraska at 3:52 a.m., and the coordinates displayed on screen seem to lead to exactly where this happened. Then we switch to found footage. The recording begins about an hour and a half after the object touches down. Although the audio is difficult to make out at times, we can hear some of the things that the people in the footage are saying, and it's pretty terrifying. Then we get a glimpse of our cameraman putting his hand near a strange mass, which seems to be the Alpha Chunk. Afterwards, cutting to the final sequence of the episode. What the hell just happened? Well, in all honesty, it's pretty vague. I'm not entirely sure. It seems like the team, after realizing the entity was alive and maybe panicking, attempted to burn the creature, which only antagonized it to attack them. An individual holding a flamethrower seemed to succumb to the anomaly, as we can see them literally melting, only to reveal his fallen helmet containing this alien creature. It's also worth noting that a seemingly important character, Dr. Lucas Michaels, appeared and subsequently disappeared from the narrative very quickly. I believe it's possible that he went into hiding after discovering some crucial information that we're still missing, or maybe he had to be silenced for the exact same reason. Just like the previous video, this one has its own separate story to tell in the description, which is going to be a trend in this series. Midwest Angelica 001. It is believed that the tape was created from sometime between April and July of 1999. However, the tape depicts footage originating as early back as 1985. It is thought that the tape was used internally at home and NASA for assessment of the circumstances surrounding AZ-001. The tape was discovered within the Grand Forks Technical College Rebel. This description doesn't give us much information the video hasn't already told us outright. However, I do think it's interesting that the tape was found in the ruins of a college, which in the real world is located all the way in northern Minnesota, very far from the Nebraska landing zone. There's also the obvious fact to note that the location is described as rubble, meaning the college has been destroyed in some way. I think the most important takeaway from this is the use of past tense. I believe the events we're seeing could be taking place decades even before the recovery of the footage, which means that humanity seems to have survived, but at what cost? Overall, this long entry seems to offer us a lot of interesting exposition. Attention is another very short TV segment entry. It starts with a brief ad for a pizza place in Iowa and switches to an infomercial about experimental pesticide tests that may have affected people living in many counties in Midwestern America. Apparently, the symptoms of the ingredients may have led to insomnia, sleepwalking, strange dreams, and general sleep problems, and anyone with those issues should have called the phone number on screen for a free consultation. It then repeats the instructions, and the video's over.
Encouraged to consult your doctor or call 1-800-555-4663 for a free evaluation today. That's 1-800-555-4663.
On the surface, it's obvious enough that the phone number contains the word home in it, which is connecting it to our main story. Apparently, based on people in the comments section, it was originally a normal phone number, but it was re-uploaded because people were calling a real person. Anyways, where this episode gets really interesting is when you take a look at its description. The footage is believed to have been recorded sometime in 1995. No known records of any pesticide tests were found to have taken place in the areas shown that year. Obviously, the second sentence is already concerning because obviously the pesticide tests did not happen and it's a cover-up, but where else has the year 1995 been referenced? Well, in Home, 1995 is the year we hear Dr. Ray O'Connor, head of the Psychological Contamination Lab, give his piece on the brainwaves recorded from AZ-001. This, along with the very specific Holmes' psychological research became crucial in understanding the nature of AZ-001 line that I talked about earlier, more or less outright confirms that the anomaly is capable of telepathic psychological effects on a pretty large scale. The next video, Starfield, is where the series really starts to hit with its horror. We open with the words Starfield Ranch, which is where the video gets its title from. The coordinates displayed on screen are about 2.5 miles north from where AZ-001 Alpha touched down. Based on the date, the video's events seem like they will occur almost simultaneously alongside the found footage events in Home, albeit having happened slightly earlier. The owner of the ranch, Avery Jones, wakes up to the sound of his dogs barking at 4:31 a.m., and his son wakes up to join him in investigating the source of the disturbance, camcorder in hand, about 7 minutes later. Another 6 minutes passes, and he convenes with his father on the edge of a wooden fence around their property.
Grab Max. I'm going to get the rifle.
What happened to Rocky?
I don't know.
What happened to...
Then, the son is left alone, until suddenly, something appears. For whatever reason, the footage that follows is incredibly degraded, and it's mostly horrifying still frames. The thing I find most interesting about these occurrences is that it didn't happen in an instant, but seems to take place over a course of like 10 or 15 minutes. If you remember earlier, the rancher said he would be retrieving the rifle, and at about 5 a.m., gunshots are heard on the recording. Considering what we're about to see, though, they clearly didn't do very much. Avery Jones is assimilated.
Mom?
Infection. More than 30 minutes passes. And in his attempts to flee the scene, he seems to succumb to an infection. We're treated to an absolutely mortifying shot at the end. The video ends with the camera recording an entirely different scene. The atmosphere has turned blood red, and it almost looks like there are giant mushrooms in the distance, and visible particles floating about the air. Not only that, but this is an entire month after the events that we just saw, and then it just ends. This video certainly has a lot to unpack. If you remember, the footage in Home begins at 5:25 a.m. Most of the events in this episode take place before that, but there is a massive cut between 5:07 and 5:30 a.m. By 5:34, the events must be taking place at or around the same time as Home, but despite them happening so close to each other, I don't think that they're the same exact events. The visual we get towards the end of the video shows a massive silhouette against the sunrise, but it doesn't really look like anything that we see in Home. I really do wonder how these simultaneous but seemingly separate events will come together in the future. By now, it seems like AZ-001 has at least two different methods of spreading its influence. The first we discovered was through the transmission of brainwaves, causing strange sleeping habits in its victims across Midwestern America. I believe the radio propagation we've seen it do as well may cause electrical interference, explaining why the recorder could survive so long, and maybe why it struggled to directly record AZ-001. The second is direct assimilation, which seems to be done either physically or by some kind of infection. This video also sheds light on the fact that AZ-001 is not specifically malicious towards humans, as it seems to do just fine with any animal that you can throw at it. The description in this video reads, Midwest Angelica 002. Little is known about Starfield Ranch other than what is shown in the footage. Files containing information about the Jones family were recovered from Home HQ alongside the tape itself, which seems to have been annotated by Home. The files also state that it is unknown how the camera continued operation long after its battery should have been depleted. This makes sense, since the battery was doing some pretty weird stuff at the end of the video, as well as the fact that it was still on a month after it was dropped. It's also worth noting that since Home HQ seems to have created and documented the family involved in the incident itself, they must have recovered the recorder at some point after the furthest point in which we see it recording, at least a whole month after the events, and likely in whatever this terrible red place is. Despite that, even in retrospect, they themselves have no idea how the camera lasted that long, a strange property that AZ-001 seems to have. The next video, titled Starkill, is only about a minute and a half. The video essentially serves to confirm that we are indeed dealing with a contagion. The xenobiology research group at Home seems to be performing organism-based testing on white-tailed deer, coyotes, and onions? The first two seemed to yield no strong results, but with the onion, the cells would be utterly destroyed and reformed to look nothing like they did before within a fraction of a second. On top of that, their research has led them to believe that the contagion possesses a degree of intelligence, and that it must be eliminated on sight due to the threat it poses to the country. They've given a code name to this contagion, STARKILL. Not much to say about this video, honestly. I think it's interesting that the screen at the beginning shows a clearance level of 3, and the other clearance level we've seen so far is 1A, which seems to be the higher clearance level. Where this video gets really confusing, though, is in its description. It reads, Midwest Angelica 002S. The tape was discovered inside a barricaded examination room in the abandoned Red Oaks Veterinary Clinic. Despite its alleged nature, the contagion shown in the video has yet to be discovered in any form. What? In the future, a tape this important is found in a random abandoned vet, and the contagion is never discovered. Though, to be fair, it being found in a random place is something that can be said about all of these description stories, but I'm honestly not 100% sure what this is implying. Maybe it's possible that even in the far future, Home had still managed to hide the knowledge of this pathogen from the general public down to the very end. Phantoms is the second longest episode in the series. It begins with a screen displaying special clearance being necessary, with unauthorized access being punishable by death. Basically, this video is going to have some deep shit. The video seems to be documentation of an incident that began on January 28th, 12 days after Alpha landed on Earth. Dr. Andrew Evans returns to the site of the landing to further study it, which means despite everything we saw happen in Starfield and Home, it's still there, and they're still doing research, almost like nothing happened. We can hear the doctor coughing. We then get to see a field photo. We get to see the uniform from Home in greater detail, along with the alpha chunk of AZ-001. Then we get a scenario recreation, and we see a familiar name, Dr. O'Connor. Dr. Evans places the new samples he just retrieved in storage, then takes an allegedly abnormal amount of time obtaining a container to refill the water cooler. Then he dispenses 2 cups of water, offering one to Dr. O'Connor.
Hey, I brought you some water. Thought you might have wanted a cup.
Thanks, Andrew. Were you able to get the results you wanted?
Fortunately, much of the alpha chunk was too necrotic to really get any good data and samples from it. Likely have to find some possibly connected to the main body of AD-001.
Sorry to hear that. I think I might be able to get you the new data you want once you figure it out. So I'll have to get back to you tomorrow on that.
That's alright. We can discuss more about it tomorrow after the meeting.
Not 10 minutes later, Dr. Evans exhibits what the video describes as unusual behavior. I'd say that's a bit more than just fucking unusual, but okay. Immediately afterwards, he leaves for his storage room elsewhere in the facility for reasons unknown, only to be confronted by a completely unknown third party. Dr. Evans asks who this individual is, despite clearly being the one who's acting suspiciously, and 2 minutes later, Home HQ is put under lockdown after gunshots are heard in the building. Then, we see this. That night, Dr. Evans' body is brought to the morgue for an autopsy. What they find is unnerving, to say the least. His x-rays are totally abnormal. The structure of his body is riddled with holes. Then, the strangest part of this story. Dr. Evans' death is ruled as an assassination by a third party. Dr. O'Connor disappears, and the vial of AZ-001 samples goes missing following the incident. End of report. This video has some wild implications. It seems that even before what we see in the video, Dr. Evans was surely infected with the contagion Starkill. His coughing in the audio alludes to that. But not only that, his actions were clearly calculated towards spreading the contagion to other people. He took a long time to replace the water because he was adding something to it or manipulating it in some way, and that cup was offered to Dr. O'Connor, who then disappeared. My guess is that Dr. O'Connor, who was the head of the Psychological Research Division, was targeted because he was getting close to some kind of answer. In my opinion, the most interesting part about this is the clear inclusion of a third party. And not only is there a third individual and a third party at large, but there seems to be clearly planned and calculated military action, as evidenced by the gunshots and the audio toward the end of the video. Honestly, I don't know why this military presence is here, but it is rather convenient that it happened, since they were able to eliminate a dangerous and influenced Dr. Evans. The description seems to offer some interesting insight as well. Midwest Angelica 003. The footage on the tape documents an event believed to have irreparably impeded Holmes' ability to safely study AZ-001. The tape was found inside an underground bunker 12 miles west of Lincoln, Nebraska. One wall within the bunker was painted with a logo similar, but not identical, to the logo used by Holmes. Honestly, we don't have enough information about the events that come after this to really know why this would irreparably impede Holmes' ability to study the anomaly. The bunker in which this tape was found is about 200 miles from the original touchdown point of the Alpha chunk, which doesn't mean much, but I did want to point it out. But there's still one thing that I find strange. The things Holmes is doing should be completely hidden to the public. Why would there be someone that Dr. Evans doesn't recognize at all in the building? Well, I kind of have an answer for that, but before I answer it, I want to cover the last short video. Bulletin begins by showing off the program schedule for a public cable network on January 30th, which is 2 days after the incident in Phantoms. Then, a short message. The Long Pine Midwest Church invites you to their weekly service on Sunday, January 31st from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. The service will be televised on this channel for those unable to attend in person. The Long Pine Midwest Church would also like to extend their gratitude to the following individuals for volunteering to assist in this weekend's service: Diane Briggs, John Carlisle, Lindsay Chatfield, Paula Horowitz, Aaron Mathis, Ray O'Connor, David Rohde, and Sarah Withrow. Well, the takeaway from this one should be pretty obvious. Ray O'Connor, our missing doctor, has been infected and plans to introduce the pathogen to more in the community, and it's happening only a day after the segment airs on TV, and only 3 days after he has escaped. His escape may very well have been the point of no return for humanity. The description says, Midwest Angelica 003S. The broadcast shown was believed to have aired sometime during the week of January 25th, 1999. The tape was found alongside another cassette in the collapsed remains of a house in Stewart, Nebraska. I wonder if we'll ever get to know the contents of the cassette found alongside this tape. Either way, for now, that's all for videos in this series. Now, let's try to piece together what it all really means. The first thing I really want to point out that I was saving for the analysis section is the naming convention that the descriptions in the series follow. Call Now is labeled as Midwest Angelica 000. Home and Attention are labeled as 001 and 001S. Starfield and Starkill are 002 and 002S, and Phantoms and Bulletin are 003 and 003S. Not only are these episodes labeled jointly, but they are often uploaded pretty closely together in double video batches. I think this is indicative of a very deliberate storytelling structure. For example, Home 001 introduces the concept of AZ001 brainwaves and psychological research, and 001S clarifies that these brainwaves could be causing unusual sleep issues in the population. Starfield 002 introduces the concept of the pathogen and assimilation through infection, which 002S Starkill clarifies. The story introduces a new concept for it to play with, and it further clarifies it in the next entry before starting the pattern all over again to introduce new things into the story. Because Call Now is labeled as 000, it could honestly be like a pilot episode of some sort. Honestly, this naming convention and the writing overall is genius. As you've learned by now, the direction is top-notch. The music and visuals feel so authentic and of the era it's trying to portray. I especially liked the segments in Home where the person begins to violently shake and melt right in front of us, and in Starfield when we see what I assume is a practical effect shot and this terrifying sequence of still frames, along with the ending. On top of that, the 3D usage in Phantoms is really impressive and way more than most internet horror series decide to do. It's super ambitious and it lands. It's honestly baffling how this channel only has 5,000 subscribers and like 126,000 views. With all of that being said, I do want to put together a theoretical series timeline and sprinkle some personal theories in here and there, starting now. In June of 1985, Dr. Michaels and his team discover an anomaly while observing the area around Jupiter's orbit. After months of further research, they determine that this anomaly is actually a giant lump of organic matter 60 kilometers in diameter, and after running some computer simulations, they determine its trajectory is slowly bringing it towards Earth. In 1987, NASA founds the Division of Heavenly Operation and Material Examination, with the goal of studying and hiding the existence of AZ001, based in Newport, Nebraska. 2 years later, Dr. Michaels disappears without a trace. Sometime in late 1991, an advertisement for a film named Midwest Angelica would air on public television in Nebraska, strangely predicting the events to come. A few years later, Dr. Ray O'Connor and his team at the Psychological Research Division discover detectable brainwaves emanating from AZ001, despite it being immeasurably far away from them. It even seems to have an effect on the population, as Home puts out an infomercial asking for people to call in any sleeping problems they've had under the guise of experimental pesticide ingredients infecting the population, despite those pesticide experiments never being documented to have actually taken place. Fast forwarding to January of 1999, just like they thought it would, AZ001 approaches Earth's orbit. However, for some reason, a significantly smaller chunk of AZ001, designated as the Alpha chunk, breaks off and falls to Earth on January 16th, it makes landfall at around 4 a.m. We still don't have any idea what happened to the larger main portion of AZ-001. About 40 minutes pass, and approximately 2.5 miles north of the landing site, a disturbance wakes the owner of Starfield Ranch at 4:31 a.m. His son follows him outside with a camcorder, but they are attacked and presumably either killed or assimilated by a hostile portion of the Alpha Chunk. Happening simultaneously at the landing site, individuals from home attempt to perform initial discovery and research on the Alpha Chunk, only to find that their corpse from the cosmos is actually alive. In an attempt to burn it, the creature retaliates, and at least one life seems to be lost. During the weeks immediately following sample collection and research on the Alpha Chunk, an incredibly dangerous pathogen with signs of intelligence is documented by Home's xenobiology research group. On January 28th, about 2 weeks after the touchdown, an incident occurs at Home HQ that requires special clearance to view its associated documentation. A certain Dr. Andrew Evans returns to the site of the Alpha Chunk to gather new samples and data. Unfortunately, at some point before this, he has already become infected with the previously mentioned pathogen, codenamed STARKILL, but he seems to be acting with clear intent to infect more people. By tampering with the water dispenser at the office, he does succeed in doing so to Dr. O'Connor. Afterwards, Dr. Evans is seen contorting his body in impossible ways, and he goes to a random storage room elsewhere in the facility for unknown reasons, before being confronted by an unknown third party. After that, gunfire takes place in the building, and a clear military intervention wipes out Dr. Evans, but not before we get to see him morph into a grotesque version of what he once was. Dr. O'Connor flees the scene and disappears. I believe it is possible our missing doctor from the beginning of the series, Dr. Lucas Michaels, could be responsible for the military intervention at Home. Since Home's job was to keep AZ-001 a secret from the public, he is the only character that we are aware of so far that could have not only defected from the organization, but maintained the information he learned to later do something about it. Though this is, I will admit, a pretty out there theory. It's just a suggestion. 2 days later, a program schedule on a public cable channel gives us an answer as to where our second missing doctor went. Horrifyingly, Dr. O'Connor has volunteered to help with a church service the next day, clearly with nothing but malicious intent to infect others at an even broader scale. It seems that AZ-001 is not only intelligent and malicious, but has the ability to control anything it infects to do its will. About 2.5 weeks later, we know that the ranch from Starfield has been transformed into a terrifying crimson wasteland, meaning that disaster could be just around the corner. But despite that being the current final entry, it doesn't end there. Every video has a story in its description that describes where the recovered footage was found, and it offers quite a lot of insight as to what may have happened within the world in the far future from the current events in the story. Despite it seeming to, for whatever reason, vaguely predict the events, the film Midwest Angelica advertised in the first video is lost media and is never recovered. The tape from Home, which we learn may have been used internally at Home and NASA by higher-ups to assess the complicated circumstances surrounding AZ-001, was mysteriously discovered in what is described as the rubble of a technical college, far north from where AZ-001 originally landed. Apparently, the footage from Starfield, as well as several other files involving the Jones family that once owned the ranch, were recovered from Home HQ at some point in the future, implying that Home had full knowledge of the events and at some point had to recover the camcorder from the wasteland we saw it in. The discovery of the pathogen in STARKILL was strangely located in a barricaded examination room in a random vet's clinic, and we discovered the pathogen was never at any point known to the public. Strangely, the immensely classified footage from Phantoms, whose unauthorized viewing was punishable by death, was found in a random bunker elsewhere in Nebraska, with a Home logo painted on one of the walls. Finally, the TV recording from Bulletin is randomly found in the ruins of a house in Stewart. All of the evidence in the descriptions points to an apocalyptic scenario transpiring at some point during this world's history. But considering all of the events we see are being recovered as tapes from the ruins of civilization and properly archived, these events could, at this point, even be a distant nightmare for the inhabitants of planet Earth in the far future of the story. Overall, if you hadn't seen Midwest Angelica before the video, hopefully you understand now why this might just be the most underrated analog horror series ever. Between the incredibly interesting premise, original music, great direction, and ridiculously enticing lore, it's easy to see exactly what makes this series nothing short of brilliant. If you had a good time, it would mean the world if you subscribed for more content like this and turned on post notifications so you don't miss a video. If you want to support me further, as of now, channel memberships should be live, and the $5 tier will grant you early access to videos. And you can also find me on Patreon or Ko-fi if you want to support me extra, as well as follow my socials and join the Discord. That being said, that's going to be all from me. I hope you enjoyed the video. Until next time.